Imagine waking up to a world where everyone suddenly discovers that aliens are real, and the government has been hiding that truth for the last 79 years. What would happen? In today's sci-fi movie recap, a man steals the biggest secret on Earth and goes on the run. What happens next will completely change the way you think about first contact. The story begins with Daniel Kenner, who has just stolen a highly classified archive from the powerful Wardex Corporation. Company agents surround him from every direction and order him to put the bag down. But Daniel refuses. He says he won't hand over the archive unless Jane is brought to him first. A few moments later, Wardex owner Nova Scanland arrives in person, and Jane is brought in tied up. Scanland demands to know who inside the company helped Daniel steal the archive. Only then does Daniel place the bag on the ground. But Scanland immediately orders all the guards to lower their weapons, because Daniel is holding a device that could explode if anyone makes a wrong move. In the end, Daniel gives up the device, picks up the bag, takes Jane with him, and escapes. After that, Wardex labels him a traitor and launches a massive operation to capture him. While fleeing, Daniel contacts his former associate Hugo Wakefield. He says he plans to upload the entire archive to the internet that very day. But Hugo warns him not to do it yet. According to him, the time still isn't right. Jane also gives Daniel several one-time encrypted phones so they can communicate without being tracked. Meanwhile, at Wardex headquarters, Scanlan meets with his team. They discover that 12 employees have suddenly disappeared, and Hugo never showed up for work. It becomes clear that this wasn't the work of one man. It was a carefully planned operation. To hide, Jane takes Daniel to an old monastery where she once trained to become a nun. The sisters welcome her and treat the injuries on Daniel's face. There, Daniel reveals that he previously served 19 months in prison for cybercrime. But this time, his goal is different. He wants to reveal the truth hidden inside the secret archive to the entire world, because in his eyes, this information does not belong to a corporation. It belongs to all of humanity. Meanwhile, the story takes a dramatic turn. In Cancer City, meteorologist Margaret Fairchild is living what seems like a normal life. Her boyfriend, Jackson, is excited about his growing career, while Margaret dreams of leaving the city and starting over somewhere else. But everything changes in an instant. A bright red bird suddenly flies through her window and stares at her for a few eerie seconds. The moment it flies away, Margaret begins speaking fluent Russian for no apparent reason. Even more disturbing, only seconds later she has no memory of what she said. On her way to work, a traffic officer stops her for speeding. Out of nowhere, Margaret starts telling the officer deeply personal details about his father, things she could never possibly know. When she snaps back to her senses, she is terrified. How could those words have come out of her mouth? At the same time, international tensions across the country continue to rise, and the military is placed on high alert. Margaret arrives at the news station, where her director scolds her for being late. But her mind is focused on only one question. Why are these mysterious events happening to her? As soon as she enters the office, she casually corrects a coworker's mistake in Korean, even though no one knew she could speak the language. Moments later, she goes live to present the weather forecast. But during the broadcast, her speech suddenly falters, and she begins speaking a strange, unidentifiable language that no one in the studio can understand. Realizing the situation is spiraling out of control, the director immediately cuts the transmission. Elsewhere, Daniel and Jane are still hiding at the farmhouse. Daniel refuses to leave Jane alone and contacts Hugo, who instructs them to move to a new safe house. Meanwhile, Margaret's viral video spreads across social media and eventually reaches Wardex. The moment Scanlan sees it, he realizes this is the case they have been waiting for years. He immediately orders his team to find Margaret before Hugo does. At the hospital, all of Margaret's medical tests come back completely normal. The doctors find no sign of any illness. Yet Margaret becomes convinced that two men in dark suits are following her. Then she hears the name Daniel Kerr. Sensing danger, she quietly escapes the hospital with Jackson. On the other side of the story, Daniel reveals Wardex's darkest secret to Jane. He explains that the organization has been secretly running a mysterious project since the 1970s. Daniel himself was once part of it, but after witnessing a horrifying video, he decided to expose the truth to the world. Jane warns him that making such a decision alone could be dangerous, but Daniel believes that the entire world has the right to know the truth. Just then, Hugo finally comes face to face with Margaret. He tells her that he has been waiting for her all along. Terrified and confused, Margaret refuses to believe him. But when the name Daniel Kenner slips out of her mouth without even thinking, she realizes she is somehow connected to a mysterious force she cannot explain. Panic sets in. Margaret throws her phone onto the road and tells Jackson to crush it under the car so no one can track their location. After that, she decides to head north on her own, convinced that Daniel will be there. Meanwhile, Hugo sends Daniel the viral video of Margaret and says, "This is the girl we've been waiting for all these years." He orders Daniel to travel to Cancer City that very night. At the same time, Wardex uses an advanced technology to reach into Jane's mind from hundreds of miles away. Jane fights back with everything she has, but under the intense pressure, she accidentally reveals the name of a monastery and a clue about a nearby river. The moment Wardex gets that information, his teams rush toward the area, and Daniel's search for Jane becomes more dangerous than ever. Scotland attempts once again to enter Jane's mind. He tells her that Daniel is becoming a threat to the entire world and begs for one last favor. Jane keeps refusing, but Scotland slowly manipulates her thoughts. At that exact moment, Margaret suddenly realizes that Scotland has already gotten inside Jane's head. She immediately calls Daniel and warns him, "Do not enter the farmhouse, no matter what." But by then, it is already too late. Daniel sneaks past the agents, reaches their vehicles, steals one of their cars, and drives straight into the farmhouse. The agents open fire, but Daniel manages to escape with Jane. As they flee, Jane suddenly pulls out a knife and attacks Daniel for no apparent reason. In reality, Scotland is still controlling her mind. Then, out of nowhere, a speeding vehicle slams into their car, and the impact finally breaks Scotland's psychic control. When Jane regains her senses, she is horrified and cannot understand why she tried to kill Daniel. To throw the agents off their trail, Daniel and Jane drive their car straight into a lake ravine. The agents assume they're dead, but Daniel and Jane quietly escape through the forest without leaving a trace. Meanwhile, Margaret keeps heading north. She's convinced that some unknown force is guiding her toward Daniel. Her boyfriend Jackson believes she's losing touch with reality, so he secretly contacts her doctor and reveals their location. By the time the doctor arrives, Margaret is already gone. At the same time, Daniel begins to suspect Hugo. He realizes that major secrets may have been hidden from him from the very beginning. When Daniel confronts him, Hugo admits that Daniel's recruitment was actually part of someone else's larger plan. As night falls, Wardex once again tries to invade Jane's mind. This time, their team manages to track down Daniel's hiding place. Daniel realizes there's no way out anymore. He hands the entire classified archive to Jane and tells her to escape through the forest, while he stays behind to face the agents alone. Meanwhile, Margaret arrives at a high-security checkpoint. To everyone's shock, she effortlessly recites every secret security code correctly and is allowed inside. The moment Scanlon sees her, he freezes in disbelief. He starts seeing his dead wife in Margaret and repeatedly calls her by the name Jocelyn. The agents around him are stunned, and no one dares to stop him. When Daniel sees Margaret, he understands that she is not an ordinary girl. She is the most important piece of the entire mystery. Margaret insists that she doesn't know Daniel or anyone connected to Wardex. But then she begins revealing details that no stranger could possibly know. She mentions an agent's injured shoulder and even says Jane's name. Everyone is left speechless. Margaret explains that sometimes, for a few seconds, she slips into other people's minds and sees their memories. It all started after she began seeing a mysterious red bird. Just then, Wardex agents launch another pursuit. As bullets rain down around them, Daniel and Margaret race toward a moving train. Another train is speeding toward them from the opposite direction. In the final seconds, Daniel tells Margaret to jump, and somehow the two manage to survive. After this incident, Margaret's condition starts getting worse. She becomes convinced that just like her father, she has developed Parkinson's disease. Daniel tries to calm her down and tells her not to panic. Meanwhile, inside Wardex, Scanlan and Hugo finally come face to face. Hugo reveals that the mysterious force Wardex has been hiding for years is far more advanced than humanity itself. He believes that mankind has concealed the truth from the entire world for 79 years, but that secret cannot remain buried forever. At the same time, Jane returns to the same monastery where she meets Sister Mora. Jane asks whether God loves only human beings. Sister Mora replies that a universe this vast could never have been created for humans alone. Soon after, Daniel and Margaret finally meet Hugo. To everyone's shock, Margaret is able to say the name of every person in the room without anyone introducing themselves. Hugo immediately realizes that Margaret is no longer the same person she once was. He then takes her to a house that has been recreated to look exactly like her childhood home. Seeing her old room leaves Margaret stunned, and she asks why it was built. Hugo finally reveals the truth. Since childhood, Margaret has carried an extraordinary power inside her, and that power has now fully awakened. Daniel's abilities awakened 15 years earlier, which is why he already knew about this secret. The two of them are then connected to a special machine designed to help Margaret reach the memories buried deep in her mind. As the process begins, she suddenly sees herself as a 10-year-old girl standing in her old bedroom. At that moment, a deer appears outside the window. Instead of being afraid, young Margaret slowly walks toward the door. Daniel realizes that he is not just watching an old memory. He is about to witness the most mysterious event that happened on that day. Inside her memories, Margaret reaches the strange house in the middle of the forest, the same place that has haunted her nightmares since childhood. Now she understands that the house was real. Inside, a young boy is already waiting. That boy is actually Daniel as a child. A mysterious light is cast over both children, and they are subjected to a strange experiment. Moments later, their eyes suddenly open, and they regain consciousness, gasping for breath. Then, without warning, Margaret is pulled back into the present. Just then, they receive word that Wardex agents have tracked down their location. Margaret uses her newly awakened power to distort the agents' vision, creating a powerful illusion. The agents walk right past them, only a few feet away, but somehow fail to see any of them. Seizing the opportunity, the group escapes through the back exit and drives away in a fire truck. A short time later, they arrived at the KCXE news station. The televisions are filled with reports of missile attacks spreading across the country. Suddenly, Margaret steps into the newsroom, and her former colleagues are stunned to see her alive. Daniel immediately begins uploading the entire classified archive stolen from Wardex onto the station's servers. His goal is simple: reveal the truth to the entire world at the same time. But Wardex is already closing in. Their team reaches the station and detonates the backup power system, plunging the entire building into darkness. In the middle of the chaos, Jane hands Margaret a mysterious device and says only one thing: tell the world the truth. The moment Margaret takes the device, the power suddenly returns, and the live broadcast comes back on the air. Speaking live to a global audience, Margaret makes the biggest revelation in human history. She exposes that Wardex has been hiding the truth about alien contact for the last 79 years. She reveals that the organization conducted secret experiments using alien technology and even subjected some extraterrestrials to inhumane treatment. Then, for the first time ever, footage of the 1947 Roswell crash and several classified military videos is shown to the world. Within minutes, not only American channels but television networks across the globe begin airing the same broadcast. People stop in the streets, in their homes, and in their offices, watching in complete shock. And then comes the most unbelievable moment of all. Hugo reveals his greatest secret. The studio doors slowly open, and a real alien, nearly 7 feet tall, walks into the room. The entire studio falls silent. The alien approaches Daniel and speaks in a language that only he can understand. Daniel listens carefully, then translates the message for Margaret. Margaret turns toward the camera. The whole world is holding its breath, waiting for her next words. And she begins delivering the alien's message. And that is the complete story of Disclosure Day, 2026. This film shows that when the truth finally comes to light, the people who fear it the most are those who built their power on lies. With constant suspense, deep mystery, and shocking twists at every turn, the story keeps you hooked until the very end. Some scenes are so powerful that you won't be able to stop yourself from cheering. If you enjoyed this sci-fi movie recap, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video with another incredible story.